Next on Currents News, the Supreme Court wraps up its term with big decisions about citizenship, the census, and where politicians can run. The drowning deaths of a migrant dad and his child continue to spur reaction. Bishop DiMarzio is speaking out on the escalating immigration crisis. In our special coverage of Religious Freedom Week, we'll hear from a priest kidnapped by ISIS. Plus, I'll have the story of caring Catholics in the Brooklyn Diocese who are going to Puerto Rico to help the island's residents recover. The news starts right now. Good evening, I'm Emily Druby. The U.S. Supreme Court is making big news on the final day of its term. The justices handing down decisions that will have far-reaching impact on how Americans are counted and how they choose their political representatives. Emily Schmidt has the latest on the rulings.
When it comes to congressional districts, the fastest way to Washington isn't always a straight line. Gerrymandering has created wiggly, sprawling, and some say partisan district boundaries, like these in North Carolina and Maryland. In a 5-4 decision written by Chief Justice John Roberts on behalf of the majority, all conservative justices, the court said excessive partisanship could lead to what seems like unjust results, but added federal judges have no license to reallocate political power between the two major political parties.
When courts decide if Republicans or Democrats win, it undermines the legitimacy of the court.
A dissent by Justice Elena Kagan said of all the times to abandon the court's duty to declare the law, this was not the one. In a second 5-4 decision, Chief Roberts wrote, this time with support from liberal justices, there's enough concern about the citizenship question on the 2020 census to block it for now, unless the Commerce Department can better justify it.
It is not, as of now, going to be on the census, and we're going to fight as hard as we can to make sure that it never is.
President Trump called the situation ridiculous, tweeting, I have asked the lawyers if they can delay the census until the court has given more information so it can make a final decision. In Washington, Emily Schmidt, Currents News.
America's bishops are in agreement with the High Court to keep the citizenship question out of the next census. The clerics pointing out that the population survey helps direct more than $800 billion each year to programs for families and the poor, saying in April, our society, rooted in the strength of the family, cannot risk missing this opportunity to give children and parents the tools they need to succeed. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo is backing the court's ruling as being good for the state, putting out a statement that says this decision will help ensure each and every New Yorker will be counted and provided with the critical services they need and deserve, regardless of their immigration status. Shame on the Trump administration for its attempt to make the U.S. Census a political pawn in their continued anti-immigrant agenda. Tonight, Brooklyn Bishop Nicholas DiMarzio is demanding congressional action and requesting prayers in the escalating immigration crisis. The bishop is speaking out strongly after the discovery of a migrant dad and his daughter dead, drowned at the U.S. southern border. The bishop is saying, as someone who has worked to address issues surrounding immigration policy for 50 years, I find the current state of affairs to be at one of the lowest points I have ever seen. As a nation, we are regressing and failing to treat people like human beings with the dignity and respect they deserve. I call on Congress to come together to agree on a border funding bill immediately. I call on all Catholics in our diocese and beyond to pray for our fellow citizens of the world. Every single one of us is made in the image of God, and no one should ever forget that. A deal is in the works to pass emergency border legislation. Late today, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said the House will, quote, reluctantly pass the Senate's version of the bill. The move is coming after the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell laid down an ultimatum.
The United States Senate is not going to pass a border funding bill that cuts the money for ICE and the Department of Defense. It's not going to happen.
The House and Senate are facing pressure to get a deal done before the 4th of July recess. Adding to the urgency, the sad and disturbing images of drowned migrants, a dad and his daughter dead on the banks of the Rio Grande. Michael Holmes is on the Mexican side of the river with the latest details, and we'd like to warn our viewers the images in this report are difficult to see, but they do illustrate the gravity of this story.
Sometimes when human tragedy is lost amid politics and rhetoric and statistics, a simple photograph can mark a sea change in how a crisis is viewed. The deaths of Oscar Alberto Martinez Ramirez and his 23-month-old daughter, Angie Valeria, could be such a moment. Like so many others, Oscar, his wife and little Valeria left their home country, El Salvador, and headed to the US in search of a better life, travelling through Mexico for weeks. But the family wasn't able to claim asylum on Sunday. The crossing was closed. Mexican newspaper La Jornada spoke to Oscar's wife. She told the paper Oscar became frustrated, impatient, and decided to take his family a few hundred yards away and cross the Rio Grande River to enter the US that way. According to Oscar Ramirez's wife, Tanya Vanessa, here's what happened. Her husband goes over to the other bank, that's the US over there, with their child, puts the child on the bank, comes back to help her come over. The child panics, gets in the water, Dad goes back to save the child, and they both ended up getting carried downstream. And this is where their bodies were found and that photograph was taken. Tanya Vanessa's agony palpable. Oscar's mother in El Salvador wishing her son had never left.
He was looking for a better future for his family without knowing he would find death.
The current outrage over what happened to this father and daughter wouldn't be happening without photographer Julia Leduc, who took that gut-wrenching frame. She knows well the impact it had, but says it can't stop there.
I hope the impact goes beyond just a viral photo. This should be an invitation to debate and to consider changes on the migratory policies, and for the two governments to ask themselves, what are we doing for the immigrants?
Today, the bodies of Oscar and little Valeria began their journeys back to El Salvador to be laid to rest in the country they fled, seeking a dream, but leaving behind a family shattered. Michael Holmes, Matamoros, Mexico.
In El Paso, Texas, a tall border fence couldn't stop people trying to get into the U.S. 5 migrants are able to scale the barrier as 2 border agents and a soldier just watch. The migrants looked to be aware of the observers, but it didn't stop them. It's not known what happened after the migrants got over the fence. The big story overseas, the president has arrived in Japan for the G20 summit. He jumped into a series of meetings this evening, the first of 2 days of talks with world leaders. The summit comes amid a trade war with China and rising tensions between the U.S. and Iran. President Trump's highest stakes meeting comes Saturday when he sits down with the Chinese President Xi Jinping. A team of caring Catholics is getting ready for their own important trip. The Brooklyn Diocese Vicariate of Black Catholic Concerns is undertaking a mission to Puerto Rico 2 years after Hurricane Maria devastated the American territory.
I'm really excited to go to Puerto Rico.
In just a few days, Stephanie Lewis will be helping to lead the group pictured here on the mission trip to Puerto Rico.
I come from a least developed country, so I know what it is to not have the proper infrastructures in place and whatnot. So me going there, actually, it's an opportunity for me to go to a different country and actually make a difference with other young people.
She moved to the U.S. from Haiti in 2011. Lewis being joined by 34 teens and chaperones. They'll be spending the week volunteering in the southern part of the island.
Even though Maria happened several years ago, they still haven't totally recovered from that, especially in the remote areas.
Father Dwayne Davis is leading the Vicariate of Black Catholic Concerns trip. He says after daily mass, the group will be cleaning an orphanage and rebuilding a chapel, aiding in the ongoing cleanup efforts after Hurricane Maria. The disaster devastated Puerto Rico, ultimately leading to the deaths of an estimated 2,975 people, the number accepted by the Puerto Rican government, but still hotly debated by many. Over 100
100,000 people have left for the mainland since Maria struck. President Trump has claimed the island has received $91 billion for the recovery effort, a figure critics suggest is much lower. But one thing is certain, the cleanup is still ongoing. Melissa Nahe will be providing on-the-ground coverage of the mission for the tablet. She's covered mission trips in the past and says while the group will be doing a lot to change Puerto Rico, they'll experience some changes themselves.
You know, they're going to come back with an experience where it'll hopefully transform their faith.
Melissa will be reporting while in Puerto Rico and is going to be coming back with some wonderful stories for the tablet. The trip is scheduled for July 1st through the 7th. The Democrats will be back at it in a few hours for round 2 of their debates. Joe Biden will take center stage as the frontrunner in the polls. He'll be flanked by Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg, along with 7 other candidates who want to be president. Last night, Mayor Bill de Blasio locked up with his primary opponents over health care.
Private insurance is not working for tens of millions of Americans. When you talk about the copays, the deductibles, the premiums, the out-of-pocket expenses, it's not working.
That's right. So for those for whom
that's
it is not working, they can choose Medicare.
We should give everyone in this country health care as a basic human right for free. Full stop.
More than 150 million Americans get their health insurance through work. Under a Democratic bill in the Senate, they'd be shifted to a government-run plan. A new poll is showing that abortion is a key issue for 2020 voters, and by a wide margin, Americans are favoring restrictions. The survey by Monmouth University found that about 2/3 of the people want at least some limitations on ending an infant's life, while 32% of the respondents are saying abortions should always be available. There's a lot more news headed your way. The deadly bus crash that took a heroic seminarian's life and how the New Yorker saved many lives. A brave nun from Syria talks about the dangers facing the faith in our special coverage of Religious Freedom Week. Sad news tonight. An off-duty New York City police officer was found dead this morning from an apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound. It's the department's 4th suicide this month. The cop who worked in the Bronx died at his Nassau County home. Additional details were not immediately available, but the city's top brass is now calling the string of deaths a crisis. In a tweet, Commissioner James O'Neill said, "This is a mental health crisis, and we, the NYPD, and the law enforcement profession as a whole absolutely must take action. This cannot be allowed to continue." Cops spend so much of their days assisting others, but before we can help the people we serve, it is imperative that we first help ourselves. The hero seminarian who gave his life to save others when a charter bus veered off a Colorado interstate will be laid to rest in his native Staten Island. Jason Paul Marshall, a 53-year-old aspiring to be a priest in the Archdiocese of Santa Fe, saw the driver of his charter bus in distress when he grabbed the wheel and prevented the bus from flipping, saving the lives of 13 passengers. His funeral mass will be celebrated at Holy Family Roman Catholic Church in Westerly at 10 o'clock in the morning on Monday. This is Religious Freedom Week in the United States, spotlighting the dangers facing the Christian faith. One Catholic priest knows the crisis firsthand. He was kidnapped by ISIS. Melissa Butts reports.
Father Jack Morad has Syria in his heart, but he's decided not to return home. He lives in the Kurdistan region of Iraq as one more refugee among others.
Refusing to return to Marmousa in Syria is a choice. I have chosen to live as a refugee alongside other refugees in order to understand them and to share in their suffering. I have done this to tell others what they have gone through.
The priest has suffered the Syrian war firsthand. He had to flee from his country torn apart by conflict with no end in sight, and in which religion has been used for violent ends.
Religions are a gift, whether it's Islam or Christianity. They endow strength and are both a path to peace. Therefore, religion should never again be used to wage war.
On May 21, 2015, Father Jacques was kidnapped by jihadists from ISIS in his monastery of Saint Helien, near the ancient city of Palmyra that had been recently conquered. They took him to Raqqa, at the time the capital of the self-proclaimed Islamic State. Thus began his months spent in Calvary. He recounts his experience in A Monk Held Hostage, a book with which he intends to send a clear message.
My experience is to share that the power of love and the strength of dialogue overcomes fear, overcomes evil, and overcomes darkness.
His great concern for the millions of Syrian refugees around the world led him to learn about the work of the community of Sant'Egidio. Their humanitarian projects have saved the lives of thousands of refugees, many of them Syrians. During those times, he developed a solid friendship with Andrea Riccardi, who wrote the prologue to A Monk Held Hostage.
It is the story of a Christian Arab living in a very complicated situation in Syria as he faces Islamic fundamentalism and jihad. It is a book to be read because it is a special testimony that presents a story from our time, but also a story of spirituality.
In the book, Father Morad also remembers another priest who has been kidnapped since 2013, Father Paolo Del Aulio. Together, they founded the monastic community of Mar Musa, a home that peacefully brings together Christians and Muslims. In Rome, Melissa Butts, Currents News.
Sister Annie Demerjian is another brave Catholic on the front lines fighting persecution. She's from Aleppo in Syria, where war has ripped the city apart and forced so many Christians to flee. In December, she was here at Currents News to describe the emergency efforts to help the people trapped in the war zone.
When we think about, okay, the war starts finishing, but we need to work on two levels. The building of soul and heart, and that is the most difficult things, and rebuilding the houses. Okay, when you have the help, it's easy to rebuild, but to rebuild the heart, the wounded heart, it will take long time because the many factories destroyed. More than 200 factories, so that left thousands of people without work. Many companies ask their employees to leave. They don't have enough to pay. So you find a good number of people without job, so without income. And those also who work, what they gain, it's very little to help them to live the whole month. So it's very important at least this period of time for aid help, because it must be goes with two parts, helping them to stand and live in their dignity, at the same time to help them to find job and start again. Many organizations, many churches are opening centers or occasion to help children to come and try to go back to their childhood. They miss the toys, they miss to play, they miss their innocent childhood. Prayer is very important. Second, I pray for the leaders in the world that the Lord will lighten their minds and give them the wisdom, because the sanction which is imposed on Syria, it's the only who's suffering is the people who's suffering. So I ask that the leaders will take this in consideration and to remove this sanction on Syria. All of us receive a message from our provincial saying we are free if we want to live. We had meeting, I remember, in that time, and our sisters from British said, Syria is my country, I can't leave it. I lived years here. And that's, it's make me feel touched by this deep way, All of us said, no, it's our country. And I think, yes, it's a very good decision because, okay, it's a very painful experience. We lost, personally, I lost many good friends to me during the war. When you think that you make little people, little children smiling and happy. You say, I touch the goal.
What a brave soul, truly doing God's work. Sister Annie also asks that everyone pray for all of those being scarred by the war. Still to come on Currents News, Monsignor Bernard Quinn's Road to Sainthood. Coverage of the Brooklyn priest is in the tablet. Editor-in-Chief Jorge Dominguez will give us a preview. She's called Sister Strike, and the nun is up for a famous award. We'll explain. This week's tablet has news of a Brooklyn priest on the road to sainthood, the Caring Way the church ministers to the hearing impaired, and more on the mission to Puerto Rico. Here with a preview of why you need to read the latest edition is the tablet's editor-in-chief, Jorge Dominguez. Jorge, Monsignor Bernard Quinn's cause for canonization is on page 1. What can readers learn?
Well, many things. First of all, Monsignor Quinn's figure. He is a fascinating figure from our diocese, and he's a priest who defended the African American Catholics in our diocese. So in that sense, for our history, it's very important. It's a fascinating figure. But on top of that, if you read the article, you are going to get all the detail how the process of canonization, how a person can be declared a saint starts. And it starts in the diocese 10 years. For 10 years, they have been getting testimonies about Monsignor Quinn, getting people who knew him or who knew about his work. And now all this information was put together and is going to be sent to the Vatican. That means that Bishop DiMarzio is saying, yes, this person should be considered for sainthood. But there are a lot of other interesting details in the story, like the personal significance that Monsignor Quinn has for Bishop DiMarzio when he was very sick 10 years ago. So you have to read the article. That's amazing. So you also have a story about a blessing for the deaf at St. James Cathedral Basilica. Who is she? It's such a touching story. It's this lady who, her parents were deaf and her sons are deaf. And he is an interpreter, he's a sign language interpreter, and he works at St. James Cathedral in the Masses for the Deaf community. You have to read that one too, it's a beautiful, touching story. That sounds incredible. Now, I reported earlier on the Catholic mission to Puerto Rico and spoke with the tablet reporter, Melissa Nahi, who's going. What stories are being planned? Well, it's these young people, they are going to Puerto Rico as a part of their formation as youth leaders, and they are going to, work there helping the hurricane victims in Puerto Rico, and we are going to be reporting from Puerto Rico about all their experiences. It's going to be fascinating. Amazing, Jorge. Thank you so much. The tablet needs your support to ensure that Catholic journalism will thrive well into the future. You can do so by subscribing to the tablet so that it comes right to your mailbox. You'll save up to 55% by having it delivered to your home versus paying for it at church. Go to the website thetablet.org/home55 or call 877-883-8356. The Dominican sister whose vicious curveball took the internet by storm last summer is up for a top television award, an ESPY from ESPN. She's being nominated in the Best Viral Sports Moment category. We spoke to Sister Mary Jo Sobiek in April.
I always wondered what going viral even meant or how that even happened. I'm just wanting to use it as a good platform to accept whatever invitation God gives us in life, because that's what happened there that night. I said yes to an invitation and trusting God would do something with it, and God certainly did.
The ESPY Awards will take place on July 10th in Los Angeles and will air nationally on ESPN and ABC. That is Currents News. I'm Emily Druby. Thank you for joining us because we are putting your faith in the news. Hope to see you again next time.